Termar Johnson, fourth pick overall. Did they make the right pick? Elijah Green is the son of a former Steelers tight end, and he went next. Did the Pirates make a good pick and the right pick at number 4?
I think so. There were probably 5, maybe 6 players who were all pretty tightly clustered for me at the top of this draft, and I don't think you could really go wrong with any of those guys. I did have Johnson ranked ahead of Elijah Green on my own big board, not by a lot. I think they were only 1 or 2 spots apart. But also, just understanding the Pirates for a long time now, I think this is really probably as much a Joe Delicari thing as anything else. They really like guys who make contact. They favor contact hitters first and figure they can potentially develop the other skills like hitting for more power once they get these guys into pro ball. And that's honestly, it's the biggest difference between Johnson and Green is that Green is a bigger guy. He's got more power. He's probably a better runner too, but there's some swing and miss. Whereas Termar Johnson, on the other hand, I had scouts say it's the best hit tool they saw in a high school kid in 10 years, maybe longer. And Johnson also just have unbelievable makeup. I have never seen a high school player act essentially as an extra coach while on the field. I saw him as a runner. He's just taking his lead off third base and giving additional instructions to the guy at bat, where his coaches, you'd expect the coaches to be doing that, that he is functioning as that. So I disagree with Termar. I know Termar thinks he's a shortstop long term. I think he's going to end up at second base, but I think he's really going to hit. And I think that the Pirates made a very good choice.
Their class last year, Keith, drew a lot of praise, those top 4 guys, and I know Henry Davis has had some injuries. How are those guys developing, and who should we be watching for out of that class a year in now?
Well, I love Henry Davis. When he's played, he's been really good. Just the poor guy can't stay healthy. And that is a hard thing about catching in general, although his biggest problem is he keeps getting hit by pitches. I want to tell him just back off the plate a little bit or maybe just wear some additional body armor, but he's going to be really good. I have no doubts about him. All he's got to do is stay healthy. And the 2 pitchers they really went over slot for, they shaved quite a bit off Davis's bonus at pick 1 and then used much of that savings to sign lefty Anthony Solometo and two-way guy Bubba Chandler, who at these futures pretty clearly on the mound. And both guys have been good so far. I think Chandler has probably been further ahead. He's been better, but Solometo has also looked really, really good. In fact, his last outing, I think he's put through 4 perfect innings, punched out 6. Stuff is good. Both guys have things to work on. They're both high school pitchers. They're 19. The biggest thing for them is just staying healthy. But I like what I see so far, and I thought it was a great class for that reason. I like the idea of saying we're going to take a really polished, state, great makeup college player with the first pick and then take some of the savings to go over slot later for some high school pitching. Because I have no issue with taking high school pitching. I just wouldn't take it in the first round, and especially not way up top where the Pirates typically draft. So for me, I think their approach last year was a really strong one, and the early returns 12 months out are very good.
Keith, we've been having this healthy debate about how long do you keep guys up here who are struggling at this level, and we cite Jack Suwinski, who came up out of nowhere, basically, Double-A here because of an injury, stuck through it all, hit 14 home runs, but he's gone 0 for 29. They sent him down. Oneil Cruz is another one who's striking out a lot, but he did that in the minors. What's the best way to handle struggling prospects who are at the major league level and either need to get sent down or do they stay through it and try to figure it out at this level?
It depends on, obviously it's specific to the player, right? You have to know your player, know the person, and whether that's going to help him or hurt him potentially. But I'd also point to the fact that there's a pretty huge gap right now between the quality of baseball that we see in the majors and what we see even in AAA. So you could take a guy like Oneil Cruz and send him to AAA, and he learns nothing, basically. Now, if you think that it helps him mentally to get a reset, that's fine. But if you're sending him to go down and you think going to work on some things, he's not. All he's going to do is go down and destroy AAA pitching. He's too good for that. And in his case, he's only been up about. I don't even think it's a month's worth of playing time. I think you've got to give a guy a much longer trial than that, especially a guy who's a top prospect, right? Suwinski is not. Suwinski's struggles are not terribly surprising to me. Oneil Cruz is a little bit more. It's a small sample. He hasn't been up for very long. You got to give him more time to make those adjustments too. You do have to give your players time to struggle and time to show that they can make those adjustments and work through it. And I look at what the Mariners have been doing with Jared Kelenic, who I still like a lot for the long term, but a player who's very hard on himself. They've given him some longer trials in the majors to let him work through some stuff. And when that hasn't happened, then they send him back to the minors for that reset to have some success, maybe to work on some specific things. But in the case, especially of someone like Cruz, as talented as he is, you've got to give him, frankly, I'm not sure what would have to happen for me to send him down. They'd have to see something with him mentally where they say, okay, you need a break, as opposed to anything really on the field. Because I think if you give him enough time, he will make those adjustments. He's done it everywhere else he's played.
Interesting. Keith Law has worked in Major League Baseball in front offices. He writes for The Athletic. So let's get back to Cruz here. Keith on the Nemacolin fan hotline. Nemacolin around every corner creates real-life magic for guests. His minor league track record, he's had some bursts of spectacular play, but really over 1,700 at-bats in all the minors. He's a .275 hitter, an even .800 OPS. He looks overmatched, Keith, right now. I mean, his on-base is .243. He's hitting .204. So my question is maybe a couple things. One, how much stock do we put in a guy's minor league track record? And number two, what do you see when you see this freakish athlete? Do you see a superstar in the making?
Oh, I absolutely do. I absolutely see a superstar in the making. There are two questions I've ever had about Oneil Cruz, and the same two questions I have now. One is, where does he play? Because he's the biggest shortstop in baseball history, by a lot, actually. Only two players ever, 6'7", have even taken one game at shortstop. He has already passed the other guy, Joel Guzman, who played there for about a hot minute and who wasn't good anywhere. Oneil Cruz is a much better athlete. He's going to play somewhere. Just the odds of him staying at shortstop are pretty low. And the other question is just, track record of 6'7" hitters in terms of making contact is not great, right? They've had a lot of trouble. They just have a larger strike zone. This has come up for a ton of guys. It even comes up, and obviously Aaron Judge is a tremendous player, but there's always swing and miss there. And there were a lot of people who missed on Aaron Judge as a prospect just because of his size. But if you look at Oneil Cruz's history, too, he has generally made a lot more contact than you would expect, especially from a guy of his size, and he hits the ball so hard. And that is the thing that has separated Aaron Judge, too, is that, yes, Judge swings and misses a lot, but he makes some of the hardest contact of anyone in baseball. Also showing up on that same list, Oneil Cruz. And he is an exceptional athlete. You've seen his arm. You've seen the speed, which to me is just amazing. And he is practically a unicorn. I just don't think we've seen a player his size show that broad set of skills. You did cite the batting average, the on-base percentage. I see them too. They're right there. We are dealing with such a tiny sample here, and my focus much more is on you're looking at some of the more granular underlying data here too, which is that when he does make contact, it's exceptional contact. He has already shown he can hit major league fastballs. He's having a hard time with major league breaking balls. That's a hard thing, right? They throw not only do they throw better sliders and curveballs in the majors than they do even in AAA, but in the majors they throw them kind of where they want them, at least a lot more than they do in the minors. And guys, plenty of really talented prospects are finding it hard to make that adjustment because my strong belief is that the gap between the majors and the minors is as big as it has ever been. Certainly in my 20 years in the industry, I've never seen any gap like this. And even very polished, highly touted, somewhat older prospects like Spencer Torkelson have struggled making that adjustment. Give Cruz time. He'll be fine.
All right. We will. Ron, does that change your opinion? The other thing that stands out here, Keith, is that he has 38 strikeouts and 98 at-bats. And I know it's a small sample, but if I extrapolate that, if extrapolate is the right word, he would have the most strikeouts in the history of the sport. I'm unsure, but it sounds like you're sure.
And only Keith, 5 walks too. And even we had the manager, Derek Shelton, does a show with us, and he even acknowledged yesterday that his plate discipline is something that they really have to monitor.
It was never an issue for him in the minors, though. That's the thing. I mean, that's a kind of a weird comment for Shelton to make because this is not a guy with a history of poor plate discipline. It's not a guy with a history of very high strikeout rates. Even in AAA this year, this is not a guy with a huge propensity to swing and miss. We see those guys, the Joey Gallos and the Aaron Judges for that matter, who have turned into obviously valuable major league players. Cruz was never like that. Part of why Cruz stood out as a 6'7" guy, you mentioned this earlier because he came up. We had a draft prospect this year, Spencer Jones, who's also 6'7". It does have a lot of swing and miss. because that's generally the history of 6'7" guys who are that tall, and we basically have had no hitters taller than that who've played for more than a cup of coffee in Major League history. Cruz stands out because, unlike almost all of those guys, he generally hasn't swung and missed very much in the minors. And I believe that's a much larger sample you're looking at across all of minor league baseball, where he was basically always young for where he played versus 100 plate appearances in the majors. It's just, it is so quick to draw a conclusion on him after 100 plate appearances. And I think you've got to see him up for the entire rest of the season before even thinking about, hey, do we change the long-term evaluation of this player?
All right, Keith, who's the top prospect down there now after Cruz? Is it Henry Davis? I mean, who would other teams want to snag off the Pirates minor league system?
Well, I don't think they're trading any prospects.
No, I meant, but just how do other teams look at their system? Who do they value?
Oh, it's Davis. It's absolutely Davis. He was the number one pick last year. I know a lot of folks thought he was one of the top 3 or 4 talents in the entire draft class. He has looked good catching when he's been able to catch so far this year. He's shown a good approach. People love the makeup. He's definitely their top remaining prospect. And, I think Chandler has really opened a lot of eyes. He is far away from the majors. Still only 19. I know they've tried to let him hit a little bit, which I think is more to satisfy him than anything else. His future is on the mound. I'm not a fan of trying to develop guys as two-way players. I think we've all been sort of enchanted by the Shohei Ohtani thing. He is, 1 in a trillion. And I would just tell Chandler, you're a pitcher long term, and your development as a pitcher is going to largely depend on the more time that you get to focus on learning the craft of pitching. And I think scouts have been very impressed by how he's looked so far. He's a long-term development guy, and so is Solometo for that matter. But those guys have certainly shown at least they were worth what the Pirates invested in them last year.
Keith, we've also had a debate about, get to this point of the season, the trade deadline comes up, and the name Brian Reynolds comes up, the name David Bednar comes up. Are the Pirates to the point where they need to start keeping their core pieces or people they think are core pieces around, or is there still the belief that you need more in your system, and if it takes trading one of those guys, depending on the return, do you do that? And what would you get for Brian Reynolds? Let's say 2 or 3 teams are interested in him.
Brian Reynolds, before this Juan Soto thing happened, I thought Brian Reynolds was going to be the best player available in the trade market this year. Now, that's not necessarily true. I still think you explore trading him, and it is more because, Reynolds is, and I like Reynolds a ton, but he's 27. By the time this core of young players that they're trying to bring along is in the majors and productive, he's going to be probably 30, which I think that would be his last year before he's eligible for free agency. I think it makes a lot more sense to explore trading him right now. And you always have the option, because he's got 3 years left to free agency, you always have the option to say no, right? You just put him out there and say, blow us away, right? If we're not getting a package back that we think is sufficient value for him, then we're just not going to trade him. We can explore it again in the offseason. We can explore it again next year at the trade deadline. He's not off to the scene. His season so far this year has not been quite as good as last year's season was, so maybe they find that the offers aren't as good and they want to wait. I would completely support that approach. I think you're not trading Reynolds unless you're getting a package of multiple prospects back, and probably 2 pretty significant guys, whether they're guys off my top 100 or guys who are just somewhere close to that, guys who the Pirates particularly value. You want to get multiple pieces coming back because that's what Reynolds is worth, and also you want to spread your risk a little bit too. You don't want to trade someone like Reynolds and then end up not really getting sufficient return because you put all your eggs in maybe one particular prospect basket.
Ron and Bob, may I finish here with a game of free association?
Sure, Joe. We love your free association. I'm sure Keith has been through this before with you.
He may have many years ago. First, a real quick answer, if you have one here, Keith. You've mentioned a couple times that you've seen more of a difference between majors and AAA than maybe ever in your career. Why is that?
There are a lot of reasons, but the number one thing that comes to mind is just the talent in the majors right now. And it's especially true of you saw it if you watched the All-Star game. The relief pitching now, the way we use pitchers, because teams can carry 1 billion pitchers also. Everybody throws, especially if you're right-handed and you don't throw 95, you're almost not a player. You're not a prospect anymore. I don't even see how it's so hard to crack a major league roster like that. And I just think the quality of players in general, the quality of pitching and the way we use pitching has really changed the nature of the game. And you just don't see that as much in the minors. I think the pitchers aren't as good, obviously, but also teams aren't rolling out. I see a lot of AA, a lot of high A. They're not rolling out one reliever every inning who's like 95, 97 with a wipeout breaking ball. They don't have the talent like that. They don't manage the games like that. They do in the majors, and it makes it much harder for hitters to make that final leap.
Here are the rules for free association, and it'll happen quickly. You are to say starter if you see this guy as a major league starter for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Star if you see him as a star, or I'm worried. Starter, star, or I'm worried. Are you ready, Keith?
Sure.
Nick Gonzalez.
I'm worried.
Ooh, I didn't expect
I've
that
never
answer.
been a fan. I've never bought that swing, and he's not a good second baseman.
Wow,
That's depressing.
that is depressing.
Yeah, they mention his name quite often here.
Quinn
Yes, they
Priester.
do. Yeah. Starter. He might be a star. At least a starter.
Okay. Leover Piguero.
Starter.
Travis Swaggerty.
I'm on the fence. I still want to believe that he's a starter. But I will say I've been a little bit worried, and that goes back before this year.
Henry Davis.
Star.
Bubba Chandler.
I'll say starter for now.
Lonnie White Jr.
He's hurt, right? Can I get a
pass?
Where
Yeah.
he gets an incomplete. That's the word I'm looking
Yes.
for. Yes.
And lastly, Jack Sawinski.
I guess I'm worried by your three categories.
And last question, Pirates will be a winner and a contender when?
2025.
Great stuff, Keith.
Yeah, Keith, excellent.
Thanks, Kurt.
Thank you, man.
We appreciate the time, man.